Okay. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to Wok Care. My name is Wesley. Today we're making a Szechuan noodle dish called Dan Dan Mian. If this is the first time that you've tuned into this, most of the things that we're making are generally things that I'm just probably going to eat for dinner. Lots of the times, the things that I'm cooking are almost always actually have recipes that go along with them. Those recipe videos live over on my YouTube page, which would be the YouTube link at the bottom of the screen. So if you're watching on Reddit, that's the YouTube link at the bottom of the screen. Lars, hello. Lars is already watching over on YouTube. A couple folks are already watching over on YouTube. So in addition to the recipe videos, that's also where we concurrently live stream, which would be the laptop behind me. The reason that we can currently live stream over there is because YouTube is fun too, but also it's also where the schedule of everything that I stream lives. So if you want to know ahead of time what I'm going to be cooking, if you were following over on YouTube, you would have known probably 2 weeks ago, maybe a little bit more, sometime in December I think, is when the schedule of things are announced. So I think usually about 2 weeks in advance everything gets announced. So some folks have started following what we're cooking and then picking up some of those ingredients beforehand and cooking along with me, which is always a little bit more fun. Because it's more fun to cook with other people. So. Today we're doing a Szechuan noodle dish called Dan Dan Mian. If you've never had Dan Dan Mian before, I can tell you that I've had it many different times in many different ways, just depending on who's cooking it, where in the world you are, but also just like whose mom is making it for you, or like what restaurant you are at, and like where that chef had happened to have been from. It can look extremely different. The American version is made with peanut butter. The most traditional version is made with tahini, or in this case we're going to be using sesame paste. But my favorite version is actually with peanut butter because I grew up eating it with peanut butter. So if you can't find sesame paste, then I know that tahini is probably a little bit hard to find. Just use peanut butter. I usually just use Skiffy, and it works really great. That's actually my preference. But I happen to have sesame paste today, so I'm going to use that. If you have any questions for me, feel free to drop your questions in the comments. I don't know everything about Dan Dan Mian or wok cooking or cooking in general or anything really, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative, or at the very least fun to watch. So, what else? Over on YouTube, that's also where we're live streaming, but it's also, in addition to the live streams, is where the recipes for everything that I cook lives. So the recipe for this Dan Dan Mian came out on the YouTube channel, I want to say 2 or 3 months ago now, and it's a fun one, fun and pretty easy one. I believe when I was doing the recipe for this Dan Dan Mian, the noodles that I was going to use ended up going bad, so I ended up doing it with dried fettuccine, so that was super fun. I don't recommend doing that, but if you absolutely can't get your hands on Asian noodles, dried fettuccine is a totally acceptable substitute. Alright, so as with many of the savory Asian dishes that I cook, probably everything that's Chinese for sure, and most of the other cuisines too, we're starting out with 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, followed by about, say, 2 tablespoons of finely minced ginger. I usually measure it by about an inch's worth of ginger, so about like an inch worth of knob of ginger. And the reason that we start out with these 2 ingredients so often is because they work very well as the like baseline layer of umami that you're starting out with. So if you're building layers of umami, a good starting point is garlic and ginger. So it's not necessarily that we want everything to taste like garlic and ginger. It's just like a nice fundamental layer of umami to start with, and then you can sort of build your castle on top of it. So if you're wondering why so many Asian recipes start with garlic and ginger. That's actually why. It's not because everything tastes like garlic and ginger, although lots of things in Asian cuisine taste like garlic and ginger. It's because it's where umami starts with, so you will frequently see it. I would say when I research recipes and I look up other ways that other people have done it, I would say like 80 to 90% of the things that I find, garlic and ginger, first two ingredients, almost always. So if you're ever at like your Chinese friend's house and you see that they have an inordinate amount of garlic and ginger, that's the reason why, is because it goes in everything. So I'd say we probably go through maybe 3 cloves of garlic and an entire knob of ginger every week or so. So that's really useful to pick up in bulk too. So for my ginger, right now I'm mincing up this ginger. There's no real secret to mincing ginger. Lots of folks ask me what's the secret behind like fine mincing ginger really well. There's no real secret. First thing I do is I start with going with a large dice, and then after that we're just going and running through our knife with it as thoroughly as you can like be persistent to do. Main thing that we want to do when we are doing a fine mince, you'll notice that the fingers on my right hand are stretched straight outward. That's very intentional. We want our fingers to be pointing this way, because if you're pointing this way you could potentially slip your fingers underneath the knife, which we don't want to do, so make sure your fingers are going straight forward and you're not going to cut a finger off. Right, so that is our ginger. And we're going to set that aside, and that's going to be the first 2 things that go into our wok. So, right. Next up is a single carrot. So this carrot, along with the celery and the peanuts, will be the 3 things that are not actually cooked. So this carrot, in addition to 2 other ingredients, are not actually ever going to end up in the wok heat. So that's important to know, because that means that it's probably one of the 3 only ingredients that we have to be very specific about, making sure that it doesn't come near any raw meat. So I'm not a huge stickler about like food safety and like meat safety and cross-contamination. The only time that I am really a real stickler about cross-contamination is when I have raw fruits or veggies, or really any raw fruits, veggies, nuts. Those are probably the 3 things that we're using today. And they're not going to get into the wok heat. So things like salmonella, that all gets killed off when you introduce it to cooking heat. Not always, but just generally. So if we're not going to be cooking something like this, for example, we want to make sure that it stays very far away from anything that is raw. So raw chicken, raw pork. There happens to be bacon and ground turkey in what we're cooking today. And I'm being very specific to make sure that those 2 things are on opposite sides of the kitchen. So we want to make sure no cross-contamination with those 2 things. But other than that, I don't particularly mind having meat next to, like, say, my ginger, for example, because my ginger is actually just going to get cooked too. So things like that, I'm not super worried about salmonella contamination or whatever, because it is eventually all going to get cooked anyway. Cool. Hello to everyone just joining. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. We're here live streaming every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. PST, and Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. PST on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST. So if you want to follow along and check out the schedule of things that we're going to be cooking in the next couple of weeks, all of that stuff lives over on the YouTube channel. We also concurrently live stream over on YouTube, which is why there's a fun schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking over the next couple of weeks. So if you're interested in following along and seeing what I'm going to be cooking in the next couple of weeks, I recommend hopping over to the YouTube channel. Lots of fun content there. In addition to the schedule, that's also where I post all of the recipe videos that go along with pretty much everything that I cook. So generally, if you're seeing me cook something on live stream, it has a recipe video that goes along with it. That recipe video probably moves a little bit slower, is a little bit paced a little bit better, and has probably fewer mistakes too. And it also has all of the written recipe for everything that I'm cooking too. So if you're interested in cooking this stuff yourself, and not just watching me cook stuff, I recommend hopping over to YouTube, checking some of that out. We have a couple of series going on right now. The probably the most popular series right now is the Chinese American food series, which is basically mostly just been deconstructing Panda Express foods, but I've lately started diving into PF Chang's and a couple other dishes too, which has been super fun because essentially what we're doing is deconstructing Chinese American foods, like real classic Chinese American food like Panda Express or PF Chang's, and then seeing what are the American qualities about Chinese American food, and seeing if we can reproduce it first. And generally when I do a Chinese American dish, I'll probably do it twice, and usually the second time we'll remove all of those American qualities and see what it looks like if I were to reconstruct it without those American qualities. So lots of times when I'm hacking a Panda Express dish, you will see me remove a whole bunch of sugar and just like remove a lot of salt from a dish, and then replace it with things like black vinegar or black soy sauce, things that are sweet but not necessarily sugary, stuff like that. So that's really been a fun series to dive into. So if you're interested in content like that, I recommend hopping over to the YouTube and checking some of that out. That's all if you're watching on Reddit, the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen, which is youtube.com/WooCanCook. Lots of fun content going on over there. Alright, so right now I am doing a julienne on a carrot. This is probably the first time in a while that I've done a julienne on a carrot, mostly because I've been pretty lazy. If you don't want to do the julienne, you can probably just get away with doing planks, and it'll be just fine. But the real secret to a julienne is start it with planks, so these are planks right now, and then we're flipping it on its side, everything is stacked, and then we're cutting downward for our julienne cut. The reason that I have frequently skipped the julienne cut is because it's very, very labor heavy. So you'll notice that I just that took almost 5 minutes to cut those julienne carrots. So it's a really labor intensive cut. And I think one of those chops where like, if you spend a couple hours doing it, you will have expert knife skills after that. So very important, these carrots, this is nothing else is going to happen to these carrots. We're not going to do any other cook to this. So if we're worried about cross-contamination, and we are using bacon and ground turkey today, we want to be very careful to make sure that these carrots stay very, very far away from our raw meat. So my raw meat over there on my left, my carrots over there behind me. Next up, I'm going to do a bit of cilantro. My cilantro is not looking super great, but I think it will work. Some folks have asked me what I do with the stems, or why I pick them off. I've found that cilantro stems, they get a little bit chewy, so I like to lose the stems when I use them as garnish. But if you don't mind the stems, you can totally leave them on. They are definitely packed with flavor, so don't throw that stuff out. What I usually do with cilantro stems is I'll throw them in a freezer bag afterward. So I'm throwing them, they're not going into a garbage right now. What they're doing is going into my stock bag. So this is just a freezer bag filled with all of my scraps. So my carrot scraps were over there too, stuff like that. All of it ends up over in my scrap bag. And then when that bag gets full, I will throw it into a stock pot with a couple beef bones and make beef broth. So very, very useful way to make a very, very useful ingredient. That goes into almost everything that I cook is beef broth. And dramatically better than like powdered broth too. Coriander, yeah, well it's cilantro, which is like adult coriander, basically. But it is pretty old though, so if I had more I would probably pick more cilantro, but I don't have more. And this will probably be enough for like 2 servings. We're probably not going to have enough cilantro for like a 3rd helping. Alright, so I'm just getting a rough chop on my cilantro. I just don't want large bits of cilantro in my garnish, and that should be it. Alright, so I'm setting that aside too. This cilantro, in addition to our carrots, is also going to be a garnish. So just like the carrots that I did earlier, I'm setting it on the opposite side of the kitchen and we're making sure that it doesn't come in contact with our raw meats. Today we're using bacon. So if you're keeping track of what are the traditional ingredients in our Dan Dan Mian today, bacon is the one that doesn't really fit in at all. Bacon definitely does not belong in a traditional Dan Dan Mian. If you were having super traditional Dan Dan Mian, you might find the use of pork fat, or sometimes pork belly, both of which are probably a lot more traditional and would taste very, very good. I have found that it's a little bit hard to find, and I generally try and avoid writing recipes that are hard for other people to reproduce. So I like using thick cut bacon for the same purpose. So what we're after with our bacon today is not actually big chunks of bacon as if we were making breakfast with bacon and eggs and hash browns. What we're after is all of this white part of our bacon. So all of this white part, that's all bacon fat. And that bacon fat is going to render into a liquid form of bacon in our wok. So we're going to render that into liquid fat, and then that's going to be our cooking liquid. So we're going to be, instead of using vegetable oil today, using that bacon fat to cook in. And it's going to be very, very tasty. To that end, I'm dicing this up pretty much as finely as I possibly can. I'm not going to go through and do a fine mince on it, but I am dicing it as finely as I can manage. And that's because we're not really after large chunks of bacon here. What we're after is the finest cut of bacon that we can get to, so that it breaks down very, very easily in our wok. Jjigae, ooh, like a kimchi jjigae, that would be super fun. I've had some rice cakes. I forget what they're called in. Maybe they're just called jjigae in Korean, but in Chinese it's called ningao, which is like year cake, I guess. It's the cake that you eat on Chinese New Year, but in Chinese food we call it a ningao, and it's basically the rice cakes that are in a kimchi jjigae. And I've been meaning to make one. I've also been meaning to make a forgot what it's called, but the super spicy kimchi dish that has a whole bunch of gochujang in it. That's on my to-do list. That and kimchi. What am I doing? Oh yeah. Actually, let's do these first. Alright, next up is our raw meat, or our raw ground meat. Probably most traditionally, if you were keeping track of what's the most traditional thing or decision to do in a really, really traditional Dan Dan Mian, would be ground pork. Probably best. I actually have ground pork today, but I decided not to use it, mostly because I'm saving it for something else. But also, I have actually leaned more towards using ground turkey instead. So this is actually ground turkey, and I think I like it more because it's a little bit more lean and a little bit less biased. So I have actually leaned toward using ground turkey a lot more lately. Because it's a little bit more lean, and I think it works really well in a Dan Dan Mian. I also do the same thing for jjajangmyeons, and actually most Chinese meat noodle dishes. So jjajangmyeons, Dan Dan Mians, Nurulmian. Nurulmian doesn't have ground meat in it, but definitely jjajangmyeon and Dan Dan Mian have tended towards using ground turkey. It's also cheaper too, I think. So very useful. For our marinade, I'm keeping it pretty simple. This is just 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and a pinch of kosher salt. You will find that when I marinate ground meat, very frequently I keep it super simple for wok fries. And that's because our sauce is going to have a whole bunch of other stuff in it. So I found that the marinade, we don't need to get super, super complicated with our marinade because it can overpower the next thing that we're going to add. So I like to keep my marinades pretty simple. Sometimes I will add a pinch of white pepper to marinades. I actually ran out of white pepper today, so we're just using soy sauce and a little bit of salt, and that's going to do it for us for this. All right. Hello to everyone just joining. My name is Wesley. This is Wok Care. If this is your first time tuning into this stream, We're cooking mostly things that I usually eat for dinner. Lots of times, almost always the things that I'm cooking are things from my childhood. So things that either my parents used to make for me, or things we used to eat at like restaurants, usually like local Bay Area restaurants. I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. So lots of times the things that I'm eating or the things that I'm reproducing are based off of stuff from restaurants in the Bay Area because they're things that I've been eating since I was a kid. So what we're doing today is a Szechuan noodle dish called Dan Dan Mian. If you've never had Dan Dan Mian, it is essentially a peanut or sometimes sesame sauce based noodle dish that leans very, very heavily on the use of sesame paste. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to drop your questions in the comments. I don't know everything about Dan Dan Mian, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative. I'm crushing up, by the way, this is some Szechuan peppercorn, which is probably the most iconic flavor in Szechuan food, which is the quality of like numbing heat that you probably have associated with Szechuan food. If this is your first time checking out these streams, almost everything that I cook on a live stream has a recipe video that goes along with it, including this one. So the recipe for this Dan Dan Mian came up on the YouTube channel a couple of weeks ago. No, a couple of months ago actually. I think that came out back in November or so. So if you're interested in reproducing what I'm cooking and not just watching me cook it, I definitely recommend hopping over to the YouTube channel. There's lots of fun stuff popping over there. We have a whole series that's based off of Chinese American foods, so it's basically just reproducing a whole bunch of stuff from P.F. Chang's and Panda Express, just doing a lot of Chinese American stuff and seeing what makes Chinese American food so American. Because to me, things like General Tso's chicken and honey sesame chicken, stuff like that's not really Chinese food anymore. It's basically just American food. And then kind of seeing what it looks like if we were to reconstruct Chinese American food without all of the American elements. So there's a whole series that's based off of that. There's another series that's based off of just reproducing foods from restaurants in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then we have another series that's entirely based off of reproducing foods from TV. So I did a couple of dishes from Legend of Korra, a couple things from Avatar: The Last Airbender, and a couple more things coming up too, I think. So lots of stuff like that. If you're interested in stuff like that, I recommend hopping over to the YouTube channel. We're working our way to 1,500 subscribers by the end of the month, so hopefully we can make it. So if you want to help us make it to that goal, hop over to YouTube, check some of that stuff out. It's super fun. Lots of fun content going on over there. It is also where all of the schedule for everything that I cook lives. So if you're interested in what I'm going to be cooking next, I actually don't know what I'm going to be cooking next, but it lives over on that YouTube page. And usually when I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be picking up ingredients for, I'll probably actually look at the YouTube channel. And the YouTube channel is the resource that I look at to tell me what I'm supposed to be cooking tomorrow. If you're interested in stuff like that, hop over to the YouTube channel, check some of that stuff out. Questions? You can't cook anything other than eggs. Yeah, definitely try. Someone asked me recently if I ever make mistakes, and I know that I actually make a lot of mistakes. Probably mess something up on almost everything that I have ever written a recipe for. Very, very infrequently that I will nail a recipe on the first try. So I would say if you're just learning a little bit more about cooking, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Super, super common, and it's, yeah, don't be afraid of it. Stuffed rice balls. Have I ever had stuffed rice balls? What I'm thinking of when you mention stuffed rice balls is, I forget what they're called. But they're made of, I'm pretty sure it's like rice flour. It's basically mochi, but it's deep fried and then it's coated in sesame seeds. And I can't believe I can't remember what these things are called in Chinese now, but we always call them sesame balls. And they're essentially rice balls. But they're deep fried, covered in sesame paste, and then inside of it is sweet red bean. And it's one of my favorite desserts. But I have actually never looked into how to make that. So maybe I'll do that. That might actually be fun. Best place to find Szechuan peppercorns. Yeah, if you live, so someone said H-Mart. If you live near an H-Mart or Ranch 99 H-Mart, Koreana here in Oakland, Koreana might not have it, but any Asian market that you live near probably will have it. if you don't live near an Asian market, I have actually, where I usually get my Szechuan peppercorns is actually not at the, so I live in Chinatown, and I actually don't get my Szechuan peppercorns there. I actually get them at Cost Plus World Market, which is actually in a lot of places. And super useful because you can actually find Szechuan peppercorns there. I actually don't know why I get my Szechuan peppercorns there. I just guess I've never actually tried to find them in Chinatown. But if you happen to live near a Cost Plus World Market, they're really useful. They have a bunch of like really random stuff. I guess they're like their whole theme and idea behind the Cost Plus World Market is just foods from around the world. So they have a bunch of like really random stuff. That was the only place that I've ever found Hawaiian guava juice. So Hawaiian Sun guava juice, which I really, really needed when I was doing the Locomoco recipe that we published a couple months ago. So if you happen to live near a Cost Plus World Market, a really useful place for Szechuan things like Szechuan peppercorn. I've also found rice noodles there, which is the only place outside of Chinatown that I've ever found rice noodles. All that stuff. But if you happen to live near an Asian market, that's generally where you'll find Szechuan peppercorns. Alright, so I just finished crushing up that with some peanuts, honey roasted peanuts actually, which I've gotten in the habit of using as garnish. Very, very tasty. I used to use raw peanuts, but I found that the honey roasted peanuts actually taste a little bit more interesting and have a little bit of extra season and like flavor to it. So you get a little bit more sweetness from it. Next up, I'm doing our sauce. So that was 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, followed by 2 tablespoons of sesame oil. Sesame oil is very, very pungent. And we're also going to be using quite a bit of sesame paste in a bit. So go easy on that stuff. I might even say, I actually forgot that I'm using sesame paste. So if you're using sesame paste, I might even say you could even cut that out entirely, or at least remove a tablespoon of it. All right, next up, that's 2 tablespoons of rice vinegar, followed by 2 tablespoons of Shaoxing wine. So if you're keeping track, these 2 ingredients, rice vinegar and Shaoxing wine, is where all of the acidity for our sauce is going to come from. So that's where basically all of our brightness is going to come from. So in like Mexican food, you use a lime, or Thai food for sure, you would use a lime. In Italian food, you use white wine. In Chinese cuisine, we use rice vinegar and Shaoxing wine. So if you can't find Shaoxing wine, it's basically just dried cooking sherry. So if you can get your hands on dry cooking sherry, I think that in America at least, that's a little bit easier to source. You can totally use dry cooking sherry, and it's basically the same thing. Right. Next up, this is 2 tablespoons of doubanjiang, which is a Chinese fermented bean paste. Some people have asked me how to find this stuff. The Lee Kum Kee version calls it a chili bean sauce, which is a really nondescript way of describing doubanjiang, because chili bean sauce basically describes all Chinese sauces. So, but it's called, what it's called is doubanjiang. Sometimes, I believe in Cantonese, it's spelled with a T, so doubanjiang. I've always seen it spelled in Mandarin with a D, so doubanjiang. But that's really just depending on who's spelling it for you. If you can't find doubanjiang though, gochujang, the Korean version, is very, very similar and a really, really useful substitute. So someone is asking me earlier about stocking a pantry for Asian ingredients. And if you are trying to prioritize what lives in your pantry, the 3 things that, for me at least, live in the same world are doubanjiang, gochujang, and miso paste. All 3 kind of live in a similar world. Miso paste is a little bit different because it's not derived from chili, so it's not quite as spicy. But definitely doubanjiang and gochujang are very, very similar. The main difference is that they are derived from different cuisines. So gochujang derived from Korean food, doubanjiang derived from Chinese food. But otherwise, to me, they taste very, very similar. So that was 2/3 cup of beef stock. If you don't have, that was a homemade beef stock, but if you don't have homemade beef stock, you can absolutely just use stock from powder, like so chicken bouillon stock, and that will work just fine too. Ooh. I'm gonna add a pinch of salt, and I forgot the most important ingredient, actually. I forgot two things. All right, next up, this is a single tablespoon of brown sugar. You want to go easy on that sugar, otherwise it's going to lean more heavily towards like a really, really American flavor. So, but if you like Chinese American food, go a little bit heavier on that sugar. And is this spoon too big? No, it's not. Lastly, this is probably the most important ingredient of a Dan Dan Mian. This is going to be 4 tablespoons of sesame paste. So you might also see this labeled as tahini. If you can't get your hands on sesame paste, I very, very frequently use peanut butter. So just plain old Skiffy, and it works really, really great. The more traditional version would definitely lean more towards the use of tahini or sesame paste, which is what we're using today. But if you can't find it, totally use peanut butter. I actually prefer using peanut butter in a Dan Dan Mian because I grew up eating the Americanized version of Dan Dan Mian, and it kind of reminds me more of how my mom used to make it. So. Alright, so we're just mixing this up until everything is kind of combined. And, oops, try not to spill it. Probably use a bigger bowl next time. Alright, let's head over to the stove. Alright, so usually if you've watched these streams before, you would have known that usually in most of the streams, this wok would be ripping hot already, but today it's actually ice cold, and I'm doing that very specifically because we want to add our bacon to a cold wok. The reason we're adding our bacon to a cold wok is because we're trying to render out bacon fat. So by adding bacon to a cold wok and then letting the wok heat up with the bacon in it, it creates the heat scenario in the wok that helps us render all of that fat into solid fats into liquid fats. So what we're going to do, you will see this technique used a lot in like Italian food, for example. So I originally got this idea from cooking bolognese. This is something that you do in bolognese. It's also something that you do in carbonara, which is essentially adding bacon or sometimes pancetta or guanciale to a cold Dutch oven, and then just turning the fire on the Dutch oven. Turn the fire on high, and then the Dutch oven will gradually start heating up with the bacon or pancetta in it. And then what happens is, as it starts gradually heating up, is that bacon starts rendering fat. Now, that doesn't work in a wok because woks are a lot thinner, so woks will heat up a whole lot faster than a Dutch oven. So for a Dutch oven, it probably will take maybe 10 minutes to heat up to high heat in a Dutch oven. That's because Dutch ovens are very, very heavy. They're made of cast iron. Now, a wok is made out of very, very thin carbon steel, like mine, which means that they heat up a lot faster. So my wok, if I were to turn the fire on to high heat, it would probably come up to temperature within like maybe 10 seconds, probably no more than 30 seconds. And if that happened, our bacon would not render fat, it would just burn. So we would have burnt bacon, which is not what we're after. So in order to work around that, what I'm doing is very, very gradually turning up the heat of my fire. So my fire right now is at, we're at medium-low fire, and we're over the next maybe like 4 more minutes, we're going to very, very gradually start turning up that heat until we have high heat on our wok. And if we do it extremely gradually, what will happen is that bacon is going to render into liquefied bacon fat. And then we're going to remove our bacon solids and then cook in that bacon fat. Yeah, before preheating, totally. So that's like a super useful way of approaching bacon if you're using it in cooking. Actually, have started doing that when I cook bacon for breakfast too. So you do a similar thing when you're cooking bacon with like scrambled eggs. And I think, but the main reason that you do that is because most people don't like eating the fat. So you're rendering out that bacon fat, so you're left with like the most solid piece of bacon that you can use. Most commonly, if you are seeing like a really, really traditional Dan Dan Mian, you would probably see either just the use of, I've seen recipes call for just pure bacon fat, or like pure pork fat, probably more commonly. I've also seen the use of pork belly, which is really, really fatty. Pork belly is essentially just fat. It's basically just pork fat. Today we're using thick cut bacon, mostly because I think that thick cut bacon is going to be a lot easier for folks to find. It's certainly a lot easier for me to find. I have always tended towards buying, when I buy bacon, I always lean towards buying thick cut bacon as opposed to thin cut bacon because it has a lot more fat content in it. So thin cut bacon, it's not going to have quite as much fat. And I have actually tried doing this with thin cut bacon and did not get enough fat out of it to really cook in. So if you're trying to do this, definitely make sure you're buying thick cut bacon. All you cook is KD. What is KD? Sorry, I love loot boxes. I actually don't know what KD is. You'll have to illuminate me. All right, so our fire is at medium heat, and I'm still gradually turning it up. So I just brought up maybe another 5% or so. And if you'll notice, my spoon. We have all of this liquefied bacon fat going on at the bottom here. That liquid is what we're after. So if we do this really, really gradually, over the next couple of minutes, that's going to start rendering into liquid fat. And we're going to have huge pools of bacon fat at the bottom, and that's what we're going to be cooking. Kraft dinner. Ooh, yeah. Best way to cook Kraft dinner is just add stuff to it, I feel like. So like if we're talking about like Kraft mac and cheese, so like blue box mac and cheese, just start adding stuff to it. So like definitely the Asian way of like spicing up a ramen is to just put a fried egg on it. That's been like the go-to for every Asian college student that I've ever known, is just throw a fried egg on it. But also, if we're talking about mac and cheese, take out the cheese. Kraft mac and cheese is essentially just noodles with a dehydrated cheese. So if you remove that cheese and replace it with real cheese, that's basically just what real mac and cheese is. Because Kraft mac and cheese is just real pasta. It's just elbow mac and cheese, or elbow pastas with a Kraft powdered cheese. So replace the powdered cheese with real cheese, and you got a much more tasty mac and cheese. Yeah, thin is easier to get crisp bacon, for sure. But we're not actually after crisp bacon today. What we're after is liquefied bacon. So I have even tested this recipe out by doing this process and then removing the solidified bacon. So actually just taking the bacon bits out and then using it like in a salad the next day. And that's actually like more in line with like the traditional flavor and taste of what a traditional Dan Dan Mian is. It doesn't have solid bits of pork in it. It's just bacon fat. It's just pork fat going on. I ultimately have decided to leave it in, mostly because it's just like, why are you picking bacon out of anything? Bacon's delicious. But if you're trying to keep it super traditional, it actually is not supposed to have solid pieces of pork in it. Right. So our heat is just past medium, so we're about like medium, just past medium basically. And we're going to gradually continue bringing that heat up for maybe another minute or two. Cool. Hello to everyone just joining. My name is Wesley. This is Wok Care. If this is your first time tuning in, most of the stuff that we're cooking today, or almost everything that I cook on live stream, lives in a recipe form over on my YouTube channel, which is why there's a YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. That would be where everything lives in recipe form. So if you're interested in reproducing what we're cooking, you can hop over to YouTube and check out the recipe over there. There is a couple different series going on over on YouTube that have been super fun for me, at least, to dive into. Hopefully people enjoy watching them, but I'm having lots of fun doing them because it's a really interesting way of deconstructing basically all of the foods that I grew up eating. So we did a whole series on Chinese American food, so like deconstructing Panda Express and P.F. Chang's recipes. And then like reconstructing them without all of the American qualities. So removing lots of sugar for me has been like one of the critical cornerstones to de-Americanizing Chinese American food, like P.F. Chang's and stuff like that, Kung Pao chicken, all of those things. We have another series that's entirely based off of just reproducing foods from TV. So there's a whole series that's just doing foods from Legend of Korra. And then I think we did a couple of things from Avatar: The Last Airbender. And then there's another series that's entirely devoted to doing stuff from local Bay Area restaurants. So I did Pad See Ew a couple of weeks ago that was based off of a Pad See Ew from a restaurant here in Oakland called Nicha Thai. And then we also did a couple of dishes based off of a restaurant in San Francisco called Dragon House, which was super fun too. So if you're interested in stuff like that, I recommend hopping over to YouTube and checking some of that stuff out. Lots of fun recipe content over there. And if you like cooking stuff and not just watching me cook stuff, or if you just want to watch me cook more stuff, that's a fun place to be. In addition to the recipes, that's where I also post the schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking over the next couple of weeks. So if you want to know ahead of time what I'm going to be cooking, you can find all of that information over on YouTube. So if you were following on YouTube, you would have known a couple of weeks ago that I would be doing this Dan Dan Mian. And I actually forgot that I was going to be doing it, so I had to check the YouTube channel to find out what I'm supposed to be cooking today. So if you're interested in stuff like that, hop over to the YouTube channel. We're working our way to 1,500 subscribers by the end of the month. I'm pretty sure we'll hit it. But if you want to help us hit it, hop over to YouTube, check some of that stuff out. Alright, so I just removed all of the solids from my bacon. So this is basically just bacon bits, if you've ever had like bacon bits in a salad. We're removing this, and then back over in our wok is our liquid bacon. So all of that fat, that's going to be really, really useful. That's actually not quite enough to cook in, so I'm going to add it a little bit. Ooh, you know what I need to do before I do that is rehydrate some noodles. Alright, so before we start cooking, I'm going to bop back over to this here and grab a bowl and let's put together some noodles. I actually didn't have time to get fresh noodles today, so we're using some dehydrated noodles, which are actually still pretty fresh. But this is going to be 8 ounces of Asian noodles. Yeah, all things considered, these are still pretty fresh noodles. So if you've ever cooked with Asian noodles before, you'll know that we don't want to treat them like we do with like dried fettuccine or most Italian noodles, stuff like that, because they're a lot more delicate than dried fettuccine. So what we're going to do instead is, instead of treating it like a big stock pot of water and then with like really, really aggressive boiling water, instead of that, what we're going to do is just add a quick blanch in some hot water. For no more than, this is going to take maybe a minute, just long enough to kind of shock it out of like its dehydrated state. And then I'm going to immediately remove it and shock it in cold water. So these noodles, they're super, super delicate, so you want to be careful to not let these overcook. And I want to say that's actually good enough. Alright, so that's really it. I'm not going to do much more to these noodles. They are actually pretty fresh already, so I'm not going to do much more. I'm removing this hot water, and then I'm just going to rinse it. I don't have a camera over the sink, but I'm cooling it down in some cold water. And that's it. We're giving it a shake, making sure all this water is removed. We don't want this water in our wok, and that is all of the par cook we're doing with our noodles. Yeah. What's my inspiration for cooking local? Who is the inspiration of cooking that is local? Lots of the stuff that I cook are mostly just things that I've eaten. I've been living in the San Francisco Bay Area for most of my life, almost my entire life. So a lot of the things that I've been eating are stuff that I've basically been eating as a kid. So things from Dragon House, for example. I don't think Dragon House exists anymore. But when I was a kid, that's where we used to go when we were kids. And that's like a lot of the ways that I know how traditional Chinese food exists is from Dragon House. And then like Ni Cha Thai, for example, that's where I did based some of my Thai dishes on. I used to live across the street from there, and I used to eat there when I was in college. So a lot of the stuff that I'm reproducing is just stuff that I've been eating over the years. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel. Almost out of time. Yeah, I think we have 5 minutes left. I don't think we'll probably need like 10 minutes to finish this. So if it does run out, I'll probably just restart it. So if you're watching on Reddit, I'll probably restart it. But if you're worried about running out of time, We're also concurrently live streaming over on YouTube, so if we do run out of time, hop over to YouTube, check that out. The YouTube channel will definitely not get cut off. What's my favorite type of noodle to use? My favorite type is actually egg noodle. This is not egg noodle because I didn't have a chance to go get egg noodle. This is, I believe, made like a wheat noodle. Yeah, it's called Taiwan fresh noodle, which doesn't mean anything. But I like noodles that are egg based out of egg. But they are a little bit more delicate and tricky to cook with, for sure. Right. So over on our wok, I forgot to switch the camera. But we're doing a long yao. In Chinese, this is the process called long yao, which is essentially adding cold oil to a hot wok, and it gives us our nice non-stick surface. Yeah, switch the camera. Thank you. So I'm adding my garlic and ginger in first. As I mentioned earlier, we add these two ingredients first because it's where we start building our layers of umami from. And then I'm gonna bloom this just long enough for it to become fragrant. So at this point, it usually takes me about 10 seconds for that to start becoming aromatic. But at this point, you really want to start using your nose. Smell it. What does it smell like? If it starts smelling like garlic and ginger in your house, that's a good sign. And once you start getting that fragrance, we're adding our ground meat in. At this point, you'll also notice that everything else that is going to be happening in our cook time. So we almost went the entire stream, on Reddit at least, without cooking anything. So that was almost entirely just prep. And that is very specifically how wok cooking works, is that the extremely high heat of a wok means that when you're cooking on the stove, everything happens really, really fast. So when I do wok cooking, you will find that almost everything that I do is basically just cutting stuff. And then the very, very last second, I'm gonna add everything else. And the reason that we spent so much time cutting stuff is because if we had not gotten that cutting down first, stuff would probably burn, which we don't want. All right, so I just threw my bacon back in the wok. If you are lazy, I've totally done this dish without removing the bacon at all. You can totally get away without removing the bacon too. Restart equals death. Yeah, it kind of does, but that's okay. Let's see. All right. Yeah, so I'm just going to give this a quick flash cook. You'll notice that there's lots of fat going on down here. That's really nice. All of that is flavor, so we want all of that fat going on. Oh yeah, I can tell you that this Dan Dan Mian, it's based off of actually an amalgamation of a bunch of different stuff. But mainly it's based off of a Dan Dan Mian that you can get here in Oakland from a restaurant called Shandong. The original recipe that I did was not necessarily Shandong's Dan Dan Mian because I used peanut butter in it. But if you're interested in like the types of Chinese food that I eat, probably the most relatable one is definitely the Shandong. People find that, have been to that restaurant quite a bit. All right, so I'm adding my noodles and my sauce in. You'll notice that my noodles are basically raw still. And that's very intentional because they will overcook very, very quickly. So we're gonna let most of that cook happen in residual heat, I think. All right. Cool. A minute left. Okay, I think I'm about to lose Reddit. I will probably restart it, but if I lose you, thank you everyone for tuning in on Reddit. Super fun streaming stuff for Reddit. My name is Wesley. This is Wok Care. If I do lose you, hop over to YouTube. The YouTube channel is concurrently live streaming as well. That's over at youtube.com/WokCanCook. Lots of folks are already over on YouTube, so that's a fun place to be. If not, definitely check out the recipes that are over on YouTube too. Lots of fun stuff going on over there. That's where all of the recipes for pretty much everything that I cook on live stream live, including the recipe for this Dan Dan Mian. So I recommend checking that out if you like cooking stuff yourself, or if you just want to watch me cook more stuff. Lots of people like to watch me chop stuff. Alright. We're working our way over on YouTube to a 1,500 subscriber goal by the end of the month. If you're watching on Reddit, that would be the subscriber bar at the bottom of the screen. I'm pretty sure we'll hit it, but if you want to help us hit it, hop over to YouTube, check some of that stuff out. Only subscribe if you're interested, but if you are interested, check that out. All right. That should do it. All right, so the very last thing that we want to do when we're finished, and I've started saying this at the end of almost every stream now, is remove everything from the wok. Don't leave stuff in a cast iron or a carbon steel wok. This is a carbon steel. Very, very important, proper wok care. If you leave something in a carbon steel wok, it will absolutely stick to it. During this time in which the wok is still pretty hot, you have a really, really nice non-stick surface, which means, so this is our wok right now, it's covered in stuff. But if I rinse it down right now, pretty much all of that is just gonna come right off. And that's because our wok is still a very, very nice non-stick wok. If we, say, for example, were to sit down and eat and then come back to it in like 45 minutes or so, you would have a really, really sticky wok. So that is not a good scene for a carbon steel wok, because it means that you have to start doing stuff on your wok that you really don't want to be doing. So things like scrubbing, you have to get out Brillo pads, you might have to like break out sponges, stainless steel or steel wool, stuff like that. All of those are things that you probably don't want to be doing in a wok. And if you take care of your wok properly, you generally won't have to do that. I have definitely had to scrub my wok before, but most of the time I have not really needed to. And that's because we take care of it correctly. So by rinsing it down when we're done cooking, all of that stuff just comes right off. Which means that we're not scrubbing. So the reason, unlike other frying pans, say like a Teflon pan or a stainless steel pan, the reason that we don't want to do any scrubbing is because a carbon steel wok has a seasoning on it. So if you've been following these streams over the last like 6 months now, you'll know that this wok used to be a very, very different color. So if I showed you the handle, you'll notice that the handle is bright gray almost. And the cooking surface of our wok is dark, dark black. And that's because over the course of time, when you use a carbon steel wok, it starts developing a seasoning. So when you start scrubbing, what you're really scrubbing off, and not just food, what you're scrubbing off is the seasoning, and that seasoning is what is making your wok non-stick. So you really don't want to get into a world where you're scrubbing. You might have noticed that I did do a little bit of scrubbing, and if you do find that stuff is sticking to your wok, and no matter what, definitely stuff is eventually going to start sticking to your wok, and that's not the end of the world. But I have found that a good solution is scrub it with the spoon. Scrub it with your cooking utensil, and it doesn't scratch. So anything wooden, it won't scratch. So super, super important when you're done cooking, clean the wok before you start eating. Marian, you came over from Reddit. Yeah, cool. Thank you for hopping over. Oh, and someone gave gold. That's awesome. I just noticed that we didn't get cut off on Reddit. That's cool. Which means we're pretty much finished. Alright, so you'll notice that our noodles are very much cooked, and we did very little to cook them. Most of that cooking just happened in residual heat. and that is because Chinese noodles are very, very delicate. You don't need to do much to cook them. I just basically blanched it in hot water for, that was maybe 30 seconds, maybe even less than that. And then after that really quick blanch, it pretty much cooks itself in the wok heat. So most of the cook, it happened in residual heat. And then I'm topping with my garnish. That's carrot, a little bit of cilantro. Oops. Pinch of peanut, and then a couple pinches of Szechuan Peppercorn. I actually meant to put this in here. Some folks have asked me to start tasting this because I oftentimes forget to taste stuff on stream. Yeah, that's really great. A little bit chewy, like the right kind of chewy that you're looking for from an Asian noodle. It's really, really heat heavy, pretty spicy because of the doubanjiang, but also like complex in heat from that Szechuan peppercorn, and the doubanjiang too is also very complex in flavor. So I love this dish. This is probably one of my favorite Chinese dishes of all time. So I hope you give it a shot. The recipe, it's over on YouTube. I'm gonna spin some stuff over on YouTube and maybe listen to some music. I'm gonna be here cleaning up. So if you have any questions, hop over to YouTube, drop your questions in the chat. I'll still be around to answer anything. If not, definitely hop over to YouTube, subscribe. Lots of fun stuff popping up over there. Yeah, I think 7 seconds, we're gonna lose Reddit. Thanks, guys. All right, Reddit or YouTube, we're still here. Cool. Let's see. Anything last bits? Yeah. Sorry, some folks have been asking me to start tasting stuff and then describe the things that I'm tasting so that you know what to taste for. The Dan Dan Mian, it's very, very like it's definitely very heavy and like sauce forward, so it's very thick, very like a lot of chew from the noodles because they're very, very much like al dente noodles because of the way that we cook them. But also that sesame paste is very, very thick and heavy, and the heat is very, very complex because we have two different kinds of pretty complex heat. So our doubanjiang is a fermented kind of heat, as well as our Szechuan peppercorn is a very, very specific kind of heat, which is like numbing heat. In addition to that, I think the flavors and layers of umami that we've built is like where all of that complex flavor comes from. So if you're trying this yourself, you might also have noticed that I used very, very little salt. The only place that I used salt today was actually in the meat marinade. And that is pretty intentional. So I very, very frequently leave out the use of salt in my sauces and marinades. I think I used maybe a pinch of salt in the salt in the the sauce. But that's pretty much it. And the reason for that is because I very, very frequently find that if you use too much salt in a dish that requires umami, that salt starts getting in the way of what umami is. So a very common misnomer is that umami is salty, which is actually not. It's like somewhere in between like savory and salty. And if you throw too much salt into something that has a lot of umami in it, you end up like conflating the two, and then it just sort of starts getting in the way. And lots of times when I like deconstruct Chinese American food, I find that it has way too much salt in it, which is common misnomer. Chinese food's actually not salty, it's just very umami forward. It's a big difference, very two different things. Crystal, yeah, totally. So that's what I was just talking about. Lots of folks have been asking me that. Asking me to taste it. Definitely, like, one of the biggest challenges for me when I do this dish is making sure those noodles don't get overcooked, because almost every time that I did it, for the first like dozen times that I did this dish, those noodles get overcooked really, really easily. So if this is your first time using Asian noodles, be super careful with it. They're very, very different from Italian noodles. Italian noodles, they take a really long time to cook, or like respectively. Probably an Italian noodle probably takes 8 to 10 minutes. An Asian noodle will, no kidding, it takes like 30 seconds. I think we blanched this for less than 30 seconds. And then I think we might have even been able to get away with without doing a blanch at all. Some folks have even told me that they just throw raw noodles into the wok, which is crazy. So, yeah. Thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wok Care. Hope you give this one a shot. If you haven't yet already, hop over to the YouTube channel. I think you're probably already there. And definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's where all of the recipe videos live, over on YouTube. There is definitely a recipe video for this particular dish. So check that out if you're interested in cooking this dish yourself. What are we doing next? So we're here streaming every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 p.m. PST. Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST. Generally doing like stuff that are like things from my childhood. Leonard, yeah, cool. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hi, Crystal. Hi, Marion. Hi, Lars. Hello to everyone. We're doing lots of stuff from my childhood. This particular Dan Dan Mian is based off of a couple of different Dan Dan Mians. Mainly it's based off of my dad's Dan Dan Mian, but also a Dan Dan Mian that you can get here in Oakland from a restaurant called Shandong. And there's a whole series that's based off of that. So we have a whole series over on YouTube that's based off of just reproducing stuff from restaurants that are local to the San Francisco Bay Area. So a couple of weeks ago we did Pad See Ew from a restaurant in Oakland called Nicha Thai. We also did a couple of dishes from a restaurant in San Francisco called Dragon House. And that's all like stuff that I used to eat when I was a kid. Lots more stuff like that coming up. So we're streaming every Tuesday. I'm sorry, I'm getting off track. Every Tuesday and Thursday, 6:30 p.m. PST. Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST. And then every Friday, new recipes are coming out. So this Friday, we are releasing. What's coming out on Friday is lion's head meatballs. We're doing Shanghainese meatballs. That's coming out, which is essentially a braised Chinese meatball in like bok choy in a wok. And that's a recipe from a restaurant in San Francisco called Dragon House. So lots more stuff coming up soon. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Keep sharing, keep tuning in. We're working our way very slowly to 1,500 subscribers. So hopefully we'll make it by the end of January. So. Crystal, I took 2 bites. I took like 3 bites actually. But I will definitely keep taking bites. I don't mind keep taking bites. Yeah, tasty. All right, thanks everyone. We'll see you soon. I'll still be here. I'm gonna do some dishes. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. And I'll spin some tunes too. Bye.